So this week's movie is Pacific Rim Uprising, or Giant Robots versus Giant Monsters Round 2. Back in the day, 5 years ago it was, that's a long time in Hollywood, 8 years. There's this great movie called Pacific Rim that basically was a monster versus giant movie, a robot movie, and it became this global sensation. It was this smash hit. It happened to be directed by a guy named Guillermo del Toro. A lot of people now know him because he just won the Academy Award for directing Shape of Water. Well, he directed the original Pacific Rim back in 2013. So, 5 years later, they decided to do a sequel, and he's not really involved. He's not directing it. I think he might have some kind of standards as a reference as an executive producer, but he's not really involved, and boy, can you tell. Here's what was so amazing about Pacific Rim. I got to tell you, at the time when I went to see this, I was expecting another Transformers movie, just giant creatures bashing giant creatures, and we've seen enough of those. You know, I've felt like just throwing up that whole genre. Let's get rid of it for 50 years and see if we can come up with something better. But then Guillermo del Toro got involved and he realized, or made me realize, that if you individualize each of the giant robots and each of the giant monsters, there can actually be a sense of real fighting, like they're humans. They have personalities, these monsters. These robots actually have techniques and strategies. You end up getting much more involved than you expected between these giant behemoths, you know, bashing each other. So that was the lesson you learned from that. I don't want to get into the whole back history because it's pretty complicated about where the monsters came from, but they did come from under the Pacific Ocean, hence Pacific Rim. And the robots were 250-foot tall robots that were made by men to fight these giant monsters, because no small little puny man could fight a giant monster. You need giant robots, and they were so complicated that you need two people inside, two pilots inside these giant robots to make them work, okay? That was the basic premise. And then the monsters got defeated by the giant robots, and all was well and good. Pacific Rim Uprising now takes place 10 years later. We haven't heard any more from these monsters. They're called kaiju, by the way, and the robots are called Jaeger, if you care to know. But the key here is that these giant robots are now part of a peaceful security guard. There have been no monsters, and the only thing on the horizon that might give anyone any concern is that big corporations come in and they've decided, we've figured out we don't need two pilots inside one of these robots' heads. We don't even need one. We can do it alone, where they're going to be drone robots. And so at first I thought this was going to be like a labor union issue movie between the pilots and the drones. But no, it turns out once one of these Jaegers, one of these giant robots goes haywire, it's all pilots on deck and everyone gets involved. Now, the problem with the story as it stands is that compared to the original, the giant monsters and the giant robots are they're not individuated enough. So it's much more moving into Transformers land, where you just have robots bashing on robots endlessly. The real problem with this movie is the human dimension. Now, in the human dimension didn't matter that much in the original because the monsters and the robots were so spectacular. In this case, they're not that spectacular, so you need to go to the human element, and the human element is this really cornball line. John Boyega, by the way, who's Finn in the Star Wars movies, he's our charismatic star. He's the wayward son of the hero who lost his life in the first Pacific Rim movie. He's brought back into the fold so he can be a teacher to a bunch of these young cadets. So they're like, you know, teenagers that he's trying to teach about how to be good fighters and good pilots. And it's a real kind of cornball line where he feels like he let down his father and doesn't deserve the kind of acclaim that his family name deserves, and he's sort of, aimless. Now he has a purpose. He's teaching these young kids, and sure enough, at the end of the movie, these kids get to be involved and sort of carry on the day. So the problem with the movie is, since if the robots and the monsters aren't going to be that interesting, the problem is then you've got to have the human element really be compelling, and instead it's not. It's a pretty traditional arc about a son who feels like he can't live up to his heroic father. Well, now he gets his chance. He trains a bunch of young teenage cadets, and sure enough, by the end of the movie, they get to prove their mettle, and he gets to, revamp his image of himself. the thing is, it's so cornball and hokey that you just want to get rid of the humans and let's get back to those giant monsters and those giant robots. And that's really the problem with this movie. I think it should be redubbed. Instead of calling it Pacific Rim Uprising, it ought to be called Pacific Rim Junior Edition, because everybody's younger, but it's like a watered down version. It's younger, it's simpler, and it's like half as interesting as the original. Ultimately, there are things, if you like big monsters bashing each other, or robots actually, bashing each other a la Transformers, then this is a movie for you, because there's a lot of energy. The special effects are gee whiz fantastic, but that's not all that Pacific Rim brought to you. If you think that Pacific Rim was a great movie, I think you're going to be disappointed by Pacific Rim Uprising. However, if you love the Transformers franchise, which I don't, if you like that, then you're going to be just fine with Pacific Rim Uprising, because really, it's the Pacific Rim franchise kind of moving in the direction of the Transformer franchise. I hope that doesn't happen, because it'd be a real shame if it did, but it just might. All of my movie reviews are brought to you by Red Wind Casino. See them here first on the KIRO Radio Facebook page, and find all of them at mynorthwest.com.